Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Common Sense Crypto channel. As with you always, this is Rich doing another video today on XRP. So I hope you're all having a wonderful day today, wherever you are in this great world. We're gonna talk about XRP. And I gotta start with this from Crypto Brothers. Is XRP finally decoupling from Ripple? So what they're talking about is FXRP launching on Flare. MXRP gains traction in DeFi, shifting identity for XRP. What they're saying is XRP is seeing adoption without Ripple. Other people are now getting involved with XRP because they see the demand for XRP. And I think that's going to continue to happen. I think as time goes on, XRP's price is not going to be so dependent on Ripple. But Ripple just creates more and more utility for XRP along the way as well. And Ripple is always going to be fully backing XRP all along the way. But XRP is absolutely finding its own identity. And when it comes to Flare, I always tell people, pack a decent bag of Flare now while it's still cheap. Flare is not going to stay cheap forever. You know, there was a time when people used to talk about Flare as a Ripple product because Ripple invested in Flare early on. A lot of people would even argue that David Schwartz did a lot of work on Flare early on as well. But Flare is going to emerge as a massive monster. Wait and see. XRP Ledger uses the same block hash as Bitcoin, says former Ripple exec Matt Hamilton. Believe it or not, now the Bitcoin maxis are trying to say that the XRP Ledger is not a blockchain. He also argued that XRP can be more profitable than Bitcoin, noting that if Michael Saylor had bought XRP instead of Bitcoin, his company would be worth twice as much today. He also shared that his own XRP investment has outperformed his Bitcoin holdings. And he also said XRP Ledger is a real blockchain, where transactions are grouped into blocks, each block containing the hash of the prior block, creating an immutable record. It even uses the same block hash and key ciphers as Bitcoin. To think that the XRP Ledger is not a blockchain, where do these people come up with this? I mean, when they run out of arguments, they create their own. XRP has a lower dormancy rate than Bitcoin and Ethereum. That's huge because that means people are actually utilizing their XRP. So specifically, 15.8% of XRP circulating supply has not moved in over a year. That's mostly retail holding XRP. And maybe some whales as well. But by comparison, analysts estimate that more than 20% of Bitcoin is dormant. And the fact that it stays dormant, not being utilized for anything, that will lead to its irrelevance. Because when people stop using something and they just buy it and hold it, that gets boring. You got to be able to put your crypto to work for you. You got to be able to utilize it to solve a real world problem, which that's what XRP does if you want to see adoption happen. Buying it and holding it gets very boring. ETF investors turn bearish on Bitcoin, bullish on XRP and Solana. I told you this was coming. I said you're going to see the money move out of those Bitcoin and Ethereum ETF funds. You're going to see that money shift towards XRP, and I think a lot of it will also go to Solana as well. They're starting to look past Bitcoin and ETH now. Nobody wants to admit it. Everybody's like, no, that's not what's going on. They're all going to come rushing back in any day now. They're already moving forward. They see better technology. They see something that solves a real world problem, and they're done with the past and they're looking towards the future. And this was absolutely ridiculous. I can't even believe somebody made this video. Bitcoin is the only thing that can save Generation Z. This is a manifesto. Gen Z is more financially screwed than any other generation. They are choking on ramen-flavored inflation, sleeping in childhood bedrooms that smell like axe, and spinning a hamster wheel greased by Jerome Powell's sweat. So here's the way I look at this. Generational Z, right? If they're fighting off inflation, why not buy something that you can own a whole coin of? I would never invest in something if I couldn't hold at least one of it. In other words, even if it was QNT, say QNT was at an astronomical price, which I think it's going to be at some point in the near future, I would only buy, that's like buying a piece of a QNT. If I can't buy one whole coin, it's not for me. And the return on investment absolutely is not in Bitcoin. The real return on investment in this cycle is going to be in XRP. Look at the catalyst lined up for it. I even think QNT is easily going to do a 10x. I think it will hit $1,000 in this run. And I was telling people to buy QNT when it was under $50. And back then, people said, come on, man, QNT's dead. It's not going to go anywhere. Then it hit 3 digits, and people were like, I should have listened to you and loaded up on some QNT. Now it's sitting just around $100, and I still think it's going above 1,000. But why would anyone want to invest in something if they can't be a whole coiner? Bitcoin's way too expensive for the average retail investor. Bitcoin is too slow. ETH gas fees are high. Solana network gets congested and transactions getting failed. What's the solution? XRP. What else are they trying to tell you right now, though? Solana is the future. Solana is going to get mainstream adoption. I'm just not seeing it. It goes down way too frequently. Expert says resilience that XRP shows doesn't happen by accident. And I agree with that. They talk about all of what XRP has been through. They never even thought it was going to get out past the first run. But here it is, still with us in 2025. The reason XRP is still here and the reason XRP is so resilient is because it's backed by the elites. They chose XRP a long time ago. They put that train in motion, and that train has never slowed down. Even with the Rippleverse SEC case, people thought it was over for XRP. I remember people selling off back then. I'm done with XRP. This is the final straw, blah, blah, blah. And I said back then, when Gary called it a security and the case started, I bought more. I did the same thing with LCX. When Gary called it a security, I bought more. Same thing with Algo. Because anything that Gary called a security, I figured would be part of the future. And if you look at where XRP is right now, it never even left the top 10. Now it's sitting as the number 3 asset. Ripple CEO says XRP could enable daily or hourly wages through instant payroll payments, revolutionizing salary cycles and financial stability. Payroll's a big one because if you could fix payroll, you will get adoption very quick because even the biggest companies out there, they hate payroll and their employee turnover comes because of their payroll as well. Most people don't like to get paid every 2 weeks. They opt for a job that pays them weekly. Other people, they would love to get paid every single day. So if you enable that and make that happen, people would be on board with that as soon as tomorrow. The biggest companies out there would adopt something like this. Same reason why micropayments are going to be a very big deal. Because people don't like to pay for subscriptions anymore. They like to pay as they go. Ripple is also coming up with a solution for that. It's called Interledger Protocol. It's going to enable so many different things. Payroll is just one of them. XRP, World Reserve Currency status. Now, this is David Schwartz talking about XRP being the world's reserve currency. But he talks about a couple other things in this as well. That's very important.
Do you believe that there can be two existing world reserve currencies to simultaneously exist?
I do, and I think that could happen. I think it's quite realistic that a lot of the world is just done with the dollar as their reserve currency. And I think that there's a lot of places that are willing to try something else. And one of my scenarios, and I don't think it's going to play out quickly, but like one of my wild case success scenarios for a digital asset is if countries start to realize that the US dollar is not going to be the reserve currency forever. Other things are going to be the reserve currency. And the same thing that we saw with banks. Like people, when we started selling software to banks, people would say to me, why would a bank use something that like you guys were selling them when they could use something that was like made by banks? And what they didn't realize is that, only like 10 banks in the country on the planet are Deutsche Bank, HSBC, Credit Suisse, JP Morgan Chase, like the ones who would build a system that the entire planet would run on. For the rest of the banks, that's 6,000 smaller banks, those are their biggest, strongest competitors. Those are the entities they hate the most. They would not want to use the system built and maintained by them because it's going to be biased in favor of them, their biggest and strongest competitors. And I think the same thing could happen to nations. Like every nation would love for their currency to be the world reserve currency. That's helped the US, that's grown the US economy, quote unquote, unfairly by leaps and bounds for decades. And every other country would be like, yeah, we'd like to have the world be the world's reserve currency. But the only countries that could possibly pull it off is the US holding its position, maybe the EU, maybe Russia, maybe one or two others. But realistically, most countries know that if there's going to be a new world reserve currency that's a country's currency, it's not going to be them. And so they might actually prefer a currency that nobody can control to one that's controlled by their largest geopolitical rivals. And so that's like what I think is the biggest possible success scenario for digital assets. If these countries are like, okay, well, the US dollar can't hold on forever, but it's not going to be our currency because no one's going to want to repeat the US dollar scenario. Nobody but the EU wants the EU to replace the dollar, right? Nobody but Russia wants the ruble to replace the dollar. Nobody but China wants the yuan to replace the dollar. So maybe they could settle on a currency that nobody could control rather than one controlled by their most powerful geopolitical rival. So if you want a success scenario, that's the one that I think is the most likely.
But the money question is, how do you get everybody to agree?
Well, I mean, they might agree if the alternative is that their geopolitical rivals force some new replacement for the dollar that's not, if they just replace, the old boss with a new boss. If the choice is no boss, if that happens to make a bunch of cryptocurrency people rich, I don't think they're going to see that as too much of a minus.
That's good.
Yeah. It was great talking to you guys.
So what he was saying is this: if every country agreed on a new world's reserve currency, it would level the playing field for everyone. It would be a currency nobody controls. And XRP would be great for that. It could become the world's reserve currency. But I always looked at it as the world's bridge currency, bridging all these currencies together. So every single country has their own currency, and maybe they go with a gold-backed currency or an asset-backed currency, but you still need something to move it. And that's what's great about being an XRP investor. You're holding what they need to move whatever it is. It could be central bank digital currency. It could be stable coins. It could be asset-backed currencies. It could be tokenized assets. It doesn't matter. Now, do I think XRP would become the world's reserve currency? It's very well possible. We really don't know, because every other country out there is already pushing away from the US dollar. Same reason they're pushing away from the SWIFT system. They want something new and modern. XRP bull flag sparks $4 breakout hopes as ledger nears 100 million milestone. So right now, it looks like the XRP ledger is gearing up to cross that milestone. And people are thinking because there's so much traction happening on the XRP ledger, it could possibly push XRP's price above $4. And that is a psychological number. Once we break above $4, I think what's going to happen is this. You're going to see FOMO like you've never seen before. I think that's going to be where we see the real breakout happen. But it is nice to see XRP Ledger nearing 100 million accounts. It's at 99.1 million right now. And we are going to see that volume, even on the XRP Ledger, that's going to rise over time. It's not something that it's like we hit this number and that's it. It's going to continue to gain traction year over year. And as that's continuing on, XRP is going to be getting burned. The demand is going to be rising. XRP is going to be taken out of circulation. And we're going to see scarcity sooner than people think. And the demand is never going to slow down. Even as the XRP dwindles away, that demand is still going to be skyrocketing. Everybody is going to want this cryptocurrency because they all know what its potential is. Right now, it's like everybody's bored with it because it goes sideways for a while. But everybody knows what XRP is built to do. So everybody's going to have it once the breakout begins. And until it happens, stay patient, stay positive, and let's get rich together. With that said, I'm going to wrap up this video. I want to thank you all for watching. I appreciate all of you. I'll see you in the next one. Have a great night.